Cruelty Squad is a game that I wanted to talk about for a long time. In fact, it was the first video that I wanted to do for this channel, and for a large number of reasons, it just didn't work out. And besides, I don't think I was as experienced as I should have been to make a video on something so strange. I played Cruelty Squad for the first time in June of 2021, after just being fascinated by, well, look at this, and it's overwhelmingly positive. I thought this was a shitpost at first, like many of you watching right now, but for those of you who have played it, you know that it's anything but. And even after my nearly 50 hours of gameplay, I still really don't know what to think about it. Like, I had this huge list of ideas, and many others have explored the concepts that I wanted to explore in this video, but even after that amount of time, it's still surprisingly enigmatic. And for the amount of content that seems to be popping up daily, I definitely think that there's still some interesting things to cover. Cruelty Squad is an iSim developed by Consumer Soft Products, a one-man indie dev from Finland. That makes 2 Finnish games I covered in a row. At first glance, it might be one of the most repulsive things that you've ever seen, and it's almost reminiscent of a lot of the strange mods that AJollyWancore would cover, or some strange Doom mods like the Sky may be, but with a twist. Shitpost was used earlier, and for a lot of that style of mod and WOD, it's mostly true. But Cruelty Squad's a lot more earnest in its execution. Its visual style is disorientating, but it's not from lack of experience from the dev side, but more of an attempt to make you feel incredibly uncomfortable. It will filter a lot of people out, but we'll get to that later. The truth is that Cruelty Squad is an incredibly deep and fun experience, and it's pretty unique in comparison to its iSim contemporaries. Hell, even Divine Cybermancy will have a run for its money. So what is Cruelty Squad? Another iSim with a strange visual style? A critique on modern life and all its philosophical quandaries, and the culture of the modern day internet connected man? It's all of the above. But most importantly, it's pretty fun. Cruelty Squad takes place in a dystopian Finland that's screwed beyond repair. It's a world where biomutations are the norm, death has been eradicated, corporations have near full and limitless control of the planet, so much so to even hinder us as a species. As this one NPC puts it, you play as a mentally ill corporate liquidations officer who's been recently discharged from the SEC death unit that could have been a government body. He's offered a job in the titular Cruelty Squad by the handler, who is a strange blob that has worked with you in the past. The Cruelty Squad is more of a profit-driven corporation, and is tasked with the murder of high executives, religious leaders, CEOs, landlords, and Funko Pop collectors. The protagonist in Cruelty Squad technically doesn't have a name. He is a playable character in Brigador, and there he's named MT Foxtrot. And in case any of you guys don't know your NATO phonetic alphabet, they've literally named him
MT Fuck.
So for the purpose of this review, I'll name him just that. Not Empty Fuck, I mean MT Foxtrot. Even though officially it's not canon. Right, here's where it gets difficult to critique Cruelty Squad's narrative. While up to a certain point it's pretty straightforward and coherent, and satirical, if a bit strange, it does go off the rails in a rather miraculous way. Like it was bonkers before, but now you have to use your brain, and maybe it's time to get those lines of Adderall out. There is a lot of discussion in the community of what actually happens after a certain point. Without spoiling too much, the game has multiple endings that can be interpreted in a multitude of different ways. I'll be going into my interpretation later in the spoiler section, which totally could be wrong, but just know that despite its seemingly simple premise, it does go to some rather strange places. The writing in the game is one of its strongest points. It's blunt as it is hilarious. It feels like most of what you're reading is a stream of consciousness from every single Twitter nut job you've ever met, but mostly the good ones. You'll get most of your exposition from the heartless to the utterly insane. It's just so unforgettable. Especially if you're in the camp that this game is trying to pull off something artistic. But without sounding too pretentious, games like Lisa have used black humor excellently in the past, and lots of people call that RPG Maker game art. Ugh, I feel a little bit sick. One of the most contentious things about Cruelty Squad is the audio, for a multitude of different reasons. In Super Bunny Hop's video he said,
You know, I can't say it doesn't fit. If anything, the soundtrack has personality. It definitely sounds like VGA DOS games from the 90s slung through the sewage as it should. I just don't know if it has the craftsmanship behind it like the visual art does.
But I'm gonna have to disagree with him. Sure, it could be argued that it's simplistic, but what Cruelty Squad's soundtrack does is to complement its visual aesthetic with an uneasy and hypnotic score. Let's take, for example, the Idiot Party soundtrack. I'll be real here and say it won't be going on any playlists soon, but I can't help but feel entranced by it, because the loops are so short and emulating a lot of those weird shareware games I would have played as a kid. It just sets up a really nice atmosphere. But then you got the apartment atrocity. And this is why I don't get handed the auxiliary chord at parties. This is the anxiety anthem, and it couldn't be more appropriate for its level. It's seemingly random beat changes and thumping bass that just give you this horrifying feeling of walking through the streets of Finglas at 3 in the morning with a head full of dodgy pills. So if you're going to say anything about the music, it's unpredictable. That's all I want to say about the music for now. But what about the sound effects? The sound design has some pretty interesting elements, and I like it. The guns all have this crunchy and distinct compression that perfectly emulates a time in gaming when you had no choice but to compress your audio. Part of me wishes they'd go back to that way. Things are getting pretty ridiculous these days. There's no distinct bassy tones, and some of the weapons do have this slightly annoying quality, but that's few and far between. One interesting element about the weapons though is as your ammo count goes lower, so does the pitch of the gun's audio, which is a neat touch, and it can keep you from looking at your ammo counter on the HUD, though it does seem that some weapons are either mixed to be either too loud or too quiet. Goring your enemies has this nice greasy pulpy effect, it's super satisfying. Empty Foxtrot does have some unsettling sounds. Take for example your jumping sound. It's weirdly rattly, and like your guns, very very distorted. But some of the augments remind me of listening to 8-hour Varte ASMR videos. Not that I've ever done that.
What the fuck?
There's also some really unnerving ambient noise that you hear from time to time. This could be from some eldritch abomination hidden somewhere in the level. One other effect I really like is the dialogue sound. It varies between the handler and the NPC, but it reminds me of the Banjo-Kazooie thing, if every NPC had a permanent stoma. Though if I was really to critique anything about the sound, it would be the lack of it. While a good proportion of the augments have these gross effects, some just don't. And this can make it hard to determine if you're even using it in the first place. The biggest offender would be the Gripendix. You know, probably one of the most popular items in the game. If you're using it to climb some buildings, it's just hard to know if it's connected or not, because sometimes it's not even visible on screen. Also, some enemies are missing sounds, or are just so quiet that if you tried adjusting the audio, you might risk blowing out your eardrums if something else came around. But it seems sometimes it's just hard to get a read of the enemy's footsteps and gunfire. And for a game that requires a lot of tactical play, this can lead to some very frustrating scenarios. However, I will give it a pass because it's an indie game. Nothing can be perfect. Well yeah, the visuals. While the music might have been a bit divisive, the visuals take it to an entirely new level. Simply put, the visuals are ugly. I tried recommending this game to a number of friends to play, but once they get to the Steam page and see them graphics, ooh, they don't want to play it. And I'm gonna imagine that's gonna resonate with a lot of you. Some of you might be like my friends, and some of you might be like me. And look, if you have succeeded in recommending this to a friend, please do let me know. One thing I've heard mentioned is that it looks completely random, devoid of any aesthetic whatsoever, and I'll strongly disagree with this. Cruelty Squad, while not being the most technically designed game, its lighting and texture work serves as a vessel to subvert your expectations of what a game should look like in the first place. Dare I say, it's almost a deconstruction of the visual identity of modern games, all while creating something entirely different. Many of you will probably assume that there was a lot of drugs being used in Cruelty Squad's development, but I'll disagree with that point, because not all art is created using drugs. Alright, well I'm an idiot. You see, one of the things I respect most about Cruelty Squad was that it's Consumer Soft Product's first video game, and Billy himself has been no stranger to experimenting with visual styles for a number of years. If you look at his Instagram and YouTube, you can see that he's been developing this visual medium for quite some time. A ton of it reminds me of the scat animation boom. And no, not the German kind. Think Rat Boy Genius, Xavier the Renegade, Gallo Sangen, Pilot Red Sun's entire videography. In the excellent Vice interview, which is a rarity these days, Billy listed off a few of his personal influences, and the most interesting thing was C. Boyardee's Dilbert Tree, which would be one of those scat animations, but it also looks like a lot of the surreal elements were taken directly from it. In that same interview, things like Bloodless Software's Deadly Rooms of Death and Mario 64 were also used as direct influences, and I definitely see that, but a lot more in the gameplay. So with all that being said, let's look at the textures and model work. Everything seems to be weird and out of place in a lot of different ways. The texture quality, while not being high fidelity, makes the game slightly unnerving. Like, you'll notice that there's faces in random places, some are warped and sludgy and brown, and these simplistic blocking grids like you'd see in a DOS or ZX Spectrum game, including the usage of the color palettes, and sometimes you might even see some meat on the wall. For this reason, I think that the textures have this interesting contrast. The NPCs are no different. A lot of texture work on these vary from weird to just outright hilarious. Every NPC you come across in the world does look visually distinct and will vary from level to level. Weirdly, a lot of the textures seem deliberately misaligned, so if eye contact is difficult for you in the first place, well, good luck. Like the objects in the game world. For the most part, everything borders on the uncanny. I think this is a rocket, I'm in the game's equivalent of SpaceX, and I know this is a person. So beyond your basic humanoids, you've got these mangled mutants throughout the game, and quite frankly, they're quite disturbing. And for the most part, it's hard to put your finger on what their purpose is. Were they just made to see how far we could bioengineer life forms while still having a pulse? I especially love these little flower slug things, or the necromechs, and this little dude. There also seems to be this light texture warping effect on the NPCs, but it's a lot more subtle than you'd expect. What I don't like about the visuals of Cruelty Squad is the lighting. It works when you're using the default level lighting, but there's a day and night cycle and weather system too that's only rarely used, and when the game does make use of it, it makes some levels unplayable. Luckily, you can change this by rebooting the level. There's barely any animation to speak of, with the characters really only having this slow walk cycle and this hilarious run. The character animations are strange and stilted, but barely anything else to complement it. Oh, and how could I forget one of the most obvious things, the HUD and the UI. The HUD might be one of the most unique designs I've seen in a game ever. From the big life counter that takes up at least an eighth of your screen, to the border filling the screen. It is what it is, and it fits a purpose. Surprisingly, I became rather numb to it after its initial obnoxiousness, and I haven't tested it, but it might be worse for players playing on different aspect ratios. Now for the UI. Things are confusing, but you'll get used to it. All the icons are alien, but if you highlight over any of the buttons, it will say what it'll do. The way that the level select is organized is uncomfortable. At first, the order of levels goes from left to right, then the second row it goes from right to left. The third row is left to right.
Who cares?
If you select the mission, it will give you the description and what you're meant to do on the top right, but not the name of the mission, and this is a very small grievance that I have, as when you click off the mission and highlight the one you like, the name is there. Lastly, let's look at the options, and it's quite minimal. You can change the colour of the blood, which is nice I guess. I never did, I need red to fuel my primal manly desires. There is a performance mode if your computer can't handle Cruelty Squad. You have your FOV options, resolutions and all that good jazz. So if you're running a computer from circa 2001, Cruelty Squad might actually work on it. I can't confirm it, but I'd be surprised if anyone had any performance issues whatsoever. So collectively, when all these elements come together, you get this rather gross and odd experience, including the music and the story. It's also deliberate and self-aware, so even the weaker points I've mentioned can't sink Cruelty Squad. Rather, it elevates it to a surrealist postmodern nightmare. One of the most surprising things to me about Cruelty Squad's gameplay is how free-spirited it is. What starts off as a somewhat limiting experience ends up becoming one of the most creatively free sandboxes I've ever seen in a game. In Cruelty Squad, you're an assassin, a mass murderer, a pill addict, a Titanfall player, a stockbroker, a cannibal, a homeowner, and a fisherman. So the core Cruelty Squad is exploring levels and assassinating your targets, but it does a few things that other shooters rarely even touch on. So let's start by shooting a few targets. I wonder if you noticed. That's right, the reload. When you need to reload, you have to hold down the right mouse button, drag your mouse down, and then up again. And while this does seem a little bit janky at first, seeing as it does take away control from your aim, it's pretty rewarding in its own right. It gives you control on how fast you want to reload, and it's somewhat skill based. It reminds me of active reload systems popularized by Gears of War. But it's on the right click, and the zoom is... wait, where? Alright, these controls are a mess. It's not horrible, and you can remap them, and you definitely should remap them, especially if you've been playing some more modern shooters recently. Though it's not Dwarf Fortress levels of confusing. At first, Cruelty Squad plays like a tactical shooter, where you play it slowly and methodically. You can crouch around and then lean around corners to shoot targets, but this lean is... how do I say it? It's a little bit shite. It affects your accuracy so badly that you think the main character's name should be renamed to Michael J. Foxtrot. I'm gonna be in so much trouble for that. So we won't use the lean, but shooting a gun is fulfilling. But once I shoot, everyone goes crazy, and it's really hard to pinpoint where I should be aiming. And the enemy stopped to shoot me, and now I'm trying to swim, and... alright, there's no way getting around this. It's just so janky. I have to play around with all this. Make sure I don't fall into the water, don't drive this car, don't crouch lean, just don't even attempt stealth. The game is actively encouraging me to not use some of its mechanics. But this kick is hilariously broken, and the erratic movement is kind of endearing. I mean, the visuals are still pretty cool, and I have a decent amount of freedom to go about my murders, so... after a short amount of time, something magical happened to me. I was put into a blissful flow state as I started to learn the map layouts, the enemy placements, and I started to use the jank actively to my advantage. Then it genuinely becomes fun. It became something else entirely. It started to feel like Hotline Miami. The game is fast-paced and you die pretty quickly, but you end up creating these unique paths and then refining them, and then sometimes you get those desperate moments of improvisation with the gore, the gameplay, and the art style. The only thing that feels different at this point is that it's a first-person shooter, but it doesn't stay like that forever. More on that later. On top of all that, this game is hard. You don't have a large health pool to begin with, and you can only recover small amounts of health with stray slices of pizza, bags of fried potatoes biscuits, which are placed in such small quantities throughout the level. There is a vending machine that you can spend your hard-earned blood money on, but I have a better alternative. The weapons range from, I don't even know why you'd want to use this, to outright broken and bizarre. For the most part, they all feel pretty great, and landing a headshot or two should effectively kill most enemies. You do get access to rocket launchers, light machine guns, fishing rods, you name it, but there is some really inspired weaponry. You might only use them just once or twice, because you'll form your own meta, but they're still fun to play around with nonetheless. The arsenal does consist of a bunch of side grades, and that's absolutely fine. Most of it is just NPC filler weaponry, and to play a cruel joke and use guys with OCD, I'm sorry, this slot machine right here, you're gonna be here for a while. So the vast majority of weapons are lethal. How about the non-lethal weaponry? It's a bit lackluster. You do get a silenced tranquilizer gun, which has a pitifully small clip and takes so much time to knock out anyone. By the time you have landed a shot, you've already been blown to bits. And the guy who's killed you is taking a well-deserved drug-induced nap. So if the tranquilizer gun was E tier, when you see the F tier, or the probably never ever should use this weapon ever tier, and that is this thing. It's the only melee option in the game, but it functions as an even worse blackjack. I feel like it was just put there for the sake of having a melee weapon, but it is just absolute shite. The one last thing I should note is the eye in the hood. While not necessarily related to guns in any way, is gonna help you if you're trying to play this stealthily at all. Just know, once you see the eye, you're already fucked. However, it's not all doom and gloom, and we'll get to that. Sneaking was never going to be the option. The smell of blood is just too enticing of a scent. You can unlock other weapons in the game by picking them up off corpses, or finding them in the world and just having them on your person when you're leaving a mission. So I mentioned the difficulty earlier. This game's difficulty is weird. At the start of the game, you're automatically put on the second hardest difficulty, the Divine Light, and once you get killed, you get dropped down to the second easiest difficulty, Flesh Automaton. The only thing that I gather that's different between most of the difficulties is the amount of damage that NPCs do. The border around your screen also changes. Sometimes it judges what enemies can spawn in missions. If you die multiple times in one level, the game pities you in the most petty way, and it drops you down to this difficulty, the Power and Misery, the easiest difficulty. And you'll spend a lot of time in this mode, and while it is easier, it still feels like getting a tooth pulled, only just with a hint of cocaine instead of that weak stuff they give you today. At this point, you can't change the difficulty until way later on in the game, and it's not conventional in any sense, but it does serve a purpose. Like, some areas in their entirety are inaccessible unless you're on specific difficulty options. There's also 2 optional difficulty modifiers that you can put on any playthrough. One is Punishment, which doubles the damage of any enemy you encounter, but doubling the end mission reward. As for the other one, you're gonna have to discover that on your own. One of the most important mechanics is character building, and the game has a list of extensive augmentations. When I said earlier that the game changes, yeah, this is where it truly changes. You get access to 4 slots: your head, your chest, your arms, and your legs. You can buy most of the augments from the menu. Some can be rather expensive and serve as money dumps or whatever this is. And you can find a few secret augments hidden throughout the world. Cruelty Squad entirely changes once you get the augments for the better. You have so much options available to you that at this point it doesn't even feel like the same game anymore. Do you want to be a stealthy pacifist? Sure, do that, and it's genuinely easier now. But like this guy says, the augments you got are all themed in this really gross biopunky way. Like the gunk boosters, you're literally shitting yourself through your feet, and that's kinda rad. Or how about the Gripendix, the only mandatory augment in the game? Well, I think it's mandatory. This one augment provides so much mobility that taking it off is like taking off your left arm. You can zoom around the map and then you can reach seemingly impossible places and just do some pretty wacky SWAT stuff. And keep in mind, this isn't the only mobility option you have available. There is so much, and you can mix and match them together for ridiculous effect. Like, I've been pretty reserved with the footage that I've used up until now, but I think I just want to play this one run in its entirety. Yeah, this is crack. I'm gonna sound like an arsehole here, but I think the Cruelty Squad is a one-of-a-kind game. It's an iSim with a punk ethos. You see, iSims are set up in a unique way that expresses player creativity within the bounds of the world. You have a lot of freedom, and the developers are very, very aware of this. So they have to think of a variety of different paths that may lead to a similar outcome. This is why I think these games fail to feel monotonous. And in general, iSims are incredibly complex to make. You have so much choice that you could spend hours messing around with one area or puzzle or anything like that. And the most important thing is the emergent gameplay. This is where the developers didn't even think of a particular strategy, but they've given you the tools to do the job. So why is it a punk iSim then? Well, while Cruelty Squad gives you a bunch of different tools to interact with the game, it focuses more on breaking the game rather than interacting with the world. You can't set up elaborate traps, deal with NPCs in more than one way, and there's very little that the world does rather than the player themselves. It feels like it's taking the emerging gameplay design to its extreme. iSims are about spending long times in levels, where Cruelty Squad almost practically encourages you to see how fast you can get the job done. Nothing interacts in the way you realistically expect it to, and that's why it's fascinating. Cruelty Squad feels like a conversation between you and the game, rather than the player and the world. Now, let's look at some of the subsystems. Are you ready, kids? It's time to take the bog pill. Do you want to exploit the market for unquantifiable gain? Well, I got some tips for you. Invest. Murder.
Dump it.
Yeah, that's the thing you can do. There's a simulated stock market that you can buy and sell shares on and actively manipulate the market if you know exactly what to do. You can essentially have every single item in the game by the 2-hour mark. But Koka, I hear you say, I don't want to invest in stocks. I think they're unethical. Well, if you don't want to play Number Go Up Simulator, you can be a humble organ harvester. Don't worry, it's only software developer organs and civvies. Nobody cares about them. Oh, is that a bit too extreme? Fine, you can go fish. And then sell your fish on the fish and organ stock market because yes, bitch, you can't escape capitalism's finest construct. So what will you be up against in this game? What will try to murder you at any given time? You got the wage slaves, the entirety of the Mexican police force, this lady who will try to stab you, who will literally shit herself so badly when she dies that it will kill you. Cute dogs, the undead, the better off dead, these guys that I really don't like because that zoom kind of makes me ill, Yui Ikari, a man made of balls that really wants to punch you, a man made of balls with a gun, and David Jaffe. The AI is kinda wonky though, in a super charming way. Gunfights are always unpredictable. Sometimes I spend way too long just lining up a shot. And while there is a large variety of enemies, they don't feel all that different to play against. And then there's the golems. Fun fact, I didn't even know you could kill these guys until the second playthrough. Don't make the same mistake that I did. Sometimes the game will actively troll you. It will just spawn random enemies from the entire pool into levels regardless of the difficulty. And this can really throw you off. It can also be so random and rare that it's hard to get footage of. Finally, I want to talk about the level design and how Cruelty Squad abuses it. It gives the players multiple approaches to complete the levels with paths that are locked by player items and status requirements. I'm going to give a brief example and talk about pharmacokinetics, the very first level. From the beginning, you're not given that much in the way of exploration. You have this ladder and you have this door. And if you go in the front door, you can go postal or try to Rainbow Six this, but either way, it's going to be bloody and it's painfully inefficient. So we take this ladder. This will lead to this vent and then you can enter through the bathroom. But if you have an explosive weapon at this point, you can destroy this door. Back to the vent. After killing this guy, walk into this door here. And if you're still on Divine Light, you can get access to a rocket launcher and a fat wad of cash. And fast access to the second target in the level. There's this door with this cave which you look up, it's seemingly inaccessible at first, but as we know, we have mobility options so we can get up there and get a secret weapon. All of the levels have this attention to detail, and it allows you to replay the game any number of times and still find something new. There's a level called Idiot Party, and I have a love-hate relationship with this level, and I hate it because how it played me. So the intended way of going through this level is going through the front door and then battling your way down a tower until you reach this, and using this is one of the only ways of getting down even further, unless you have particular augmentations. I didn't at the time. I found myself constantly falling into this big green trampoline and then ending my run instantly. So you get down into this big open room, slowly shoot every single target that you possibly can, so you try to find a way out. So at the opposite end of the room, there's an elevator. So you reach the elevator and this elevator right here. You know, the one that'll bring you back to the start level, in the shed that you never thought about looking in. The one that you can go in from the very, very beginning to bring you all the way down to the very, very bottom. This is madness. Maybe it's a party for me, but after a short while, I grew to love it. It's hilarious, and it takes so much balls to have a route like that that's just so easily accessible from the very, very beginning. And this is why I love breaking the game so much. The game feels so unfair that once you discover things like this that make every bit of the experience trivial, it feels fantastic. From finding the most broken weapon ever, or just finding out how to beat a level in 15 seconds, or just allowing the enemies to fall apart right in front of you. It's just so amazing, and a game like this could have only ever been made by one person. If you've gotten this far in the video, well, congratulations. Let's talk about spoilers. I'm going to structure this in a simple way. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the final level of the game, and the 3 others that are important to the actual structure of the narrative. So get your floaties ready, because this is going to be deep. At a certain point, Cruelty Squad kinda goes off the deep end narratively. Not that the early sections of the game really give off that impression that it was gonna be deeper than it is, though if you're picking up on certain things that were mentioned by some of the more eccentric NPCs, well, you'd know that there's something going wrong. Empty Foxtrot is a vessel for the player to experience the world of Cruelty Squad. Without much characterization from him, We really have to rely on the handler to get where this is going. Sure, he gives you the job in the first place, literally informs you that you were next on the hit list for Cruelty Squad, and after your murderous escape, while taking your landlord along the way, he notes that this was purely a clerical error. Despite this being a tongue-in-cheek joke about the stress organizations can cause their customers, and the fact that in the modern day you can't even escape the worst people, even from the comfort of your own home, a few missions later, you're killing all those people who have given you the hits in the first place. If there's no one to pay you anymore, then surely this is the logical place to end it all, right? Well, that's where the Archon grid comes in, where at first glance all the logic that was remotely associated with the world is thrown out the window. As this NPC notes, and part of this is true, you aren't really given a target, but here you can regain your divine light, and when you exit this seemingly liminal space, you are brought into a room that's similar to your apartment bedroom. And like in the intro, you look out the window and there it is, punishment. Hey, and Gorbino's quest. So you just keep trucking on, and just look at this world. What happened here? And what the fuck is that? With all that strange chatter before and now this crab thing that the fans of the game have called Gorbino, you gotta play his game by doing some block puzzles which you could totally mess up and you'll have to reset the level, all while this horrific creature taunts you. So that's why you avoid him entirely by using this small route right here. But what is the objective? This guy right here. This fight can be a little bit frustrating, so just keep your range and just make sure you kill the laser beam head first. And finally, after murdering the deity of the Archon grid, whose face is probably familiar to you at this point, you make your escape, and the first ending. Technically, you complete the game at this point. And while up to this point the game has given you a guiding hand, you really now have to search every nook and cranny, talk to every NPC to find the secrets of the world. Or you can save yourself a few hours and look at a guide. There's no shame in that. The first thing that most players will do at this point is probably try to buy that nice unlockable house. You know, that one that's how much? Get ready to grind, kids! Anyway, whatever way you want to get the money for this, whether it be speedrunning missions on punishment and then investing the money in stock with the eyes of corporate insight equipped, or fishing, the grind's gonna take a while. Anywho, house. You can finally relax after 30 years. No more living in apartments with shitty landlords. But you get your house and explore a little bit. Look at all the surprises, like your brand new car. This beautiful lakeside view, just ignore that right there. Wow, 21 copies of a Gorbino's quest, just because you really need to be reminded of that horrific nightmare. Friendly neighbors, a 3-minute drive into town, and 3 more targets to murder. But these targets, why now? Why when you were supposedly meant to settle down, enjoy your life away from the Cruelty Squad? But these 3, why are they so important? Well, these guys are the prophets of the Trigons, those ball snakes that the ball guys were seemingly worshipping. The Trigons are the gods of the world in Cruelty Squad. And this is kind of important to note. You see, in the Vice interview, Billy mentioned that one of his core influences was Gnosticism, which is an early opposing Orthodox Christianity, which was lost until about 80 years ago, and separates the material world from the spiritual world. There's also a supreme god, or gods, that is incomprehensible, and then lesser gods. But then there's also some belief that humans have a smaller part of God in them. It's a super complex theological rabbit hole. You can watch this video for an overview, or read any of the number of books that go into detail about the subject. Oh, and don't forget to take these funny pills while you're looking it up. And even then, I don't think Billy considers this to be all that serious. But if we look at the Trigons, much like we look at Gnosticism, we can see that they're the gods of the material world rather than spiritual, or a deity. And as you talk to the prophets, they mention all of the successes and failures of Cruelty Squad's world are formed from the Trigons. So anyway, once you start shooting the funny ball snakes, they give you access to unique powers. One power is the ability to turn yourself into the punchy ball men, this neat pump action shotgun, and $1 million, which you probably have no use for anymore, but hey, you can still dump it into stocks. And definitely start putting all your money into stocks. I'm not a qualified financial advisor, but this is definitely financial advice. Let's dive. First we need to change it to Hope Eradicated mode. Yeah, the 4th difficulty, and this is essentially the hardest difficulty. This is a bunch of extra modifiers active, which include an extra target and more enemy variety per level. The enemies do full damage to you, and the lighting changes, so does the music, but that starts to slow down and start to sound super eerie. You can activate this by going into Cruelty Squad's headquarters and doing this. Yeah, changing the resolution. Like this guy said before. But you only need to be in this mode to unlock death mode from one secret level, and we will get there. Anyway, unlocking death mode, it's simple. Just go to pharmacokinetics. Yeah, this door was here all along. Now you have the ability to be immune to certain toxic gases, and you can wall jump. So now it's time we go back to where it all began, the Cruelty Squad headquarters. If you have the cursed flashlight equipped, something very interesting should happen. One is, you'll start the whole level and hope eradicated, and every single named NPC dies permanently. This is just something I found strange initially. You see, in the world of Cruelty Squad, the rich essentially can live forever by paying the price for resurrection. But these guys didn't come back at all. Does that mean all your assassinations at this point have been for nothing? If the named NPCs die for good and you repeat missions and the targets come back, I think so. You even have to pay the resurrection tax at first, until the game thinks you're too bad, and now you've essentially died by going into death mode. You've transcended death. So yeah, you can go deeper into the Cruelty Squad headquarters and find this big scary eye door. So what's here? One singular target with how much HP? Yeah, you're going to be here for a while. There's a few ways to take him down, but I found a tranquilizer bolt ACR combo worked best. Yeah, this isn't cheesy at all. Okay, hear me out for a second. This little shit right here doesn't outright kill you. He humiliates you. He turns you into a crippled mound of sentient flesh with a DNA gun, and that's harsh. Oh, right, I guess I'm a little bit of a hypocrite. After defeating him, you get the life ending. At first, this ending seems to imply that you're an awful shell of a human being. It starts to compliment you and give you life advice. Invest. Have the CEO mindset. You get the drill. I don't want to go into super detail about some of the secret levels, but there's a few things I want to point out before going any further. I do like them all, aside from Dark World. Like, the atmosphere here is top notch, but this is the worst level for any YouTube video ever. Anyway, you talk to this guy and wait. Yeah, he knew I was set to kill him, again and again. He asks you how you're gonna do it this time and all, because, like you, or anyone, he can't die. The ski resort Alpine Hospitality is pretty fun. You can find a flamethrower here. You can be super effective with this and set all the gibs on fire and then eat them for bonus health. Neuron Activator, the nightclub level, will kill your FPS. And maybe I'm relating to this guy a little bit too much. Also, the description of this level mentions that it's in Helsinki. I thought you guys wouldn't be into the whole nightclubbing thing. Finally, there's Miner's Miracle, which in my opinion is the most difficult secret level, purely because of these guys. You know, the ones with the flesh rats embedded in their head. There's also that one sniper guy that always managed to confuse me. Can you even get to this guy, I wonder? First time I did this level, it bugged out on me and set me out of bounds. Second time I tried to do it the intended way and... Are you fucking serious? And that's it for the secret levels. There's definitely nothing else for me to cover here. Nothing at all. Please don't make me do it. Drama Loop is the final level in Cruelty Squad. It has the most fitting name for any level in any video game ever if my therapist is to be believed. It can only be accessed by completing every level in the game. You'd think this would be the final hurrah, using everything you've gotten and learned at this point to take out the one big bad, but deep down we all knew this wouldn't happen. There's no target or direction like the Archon grid. So, How does it differentiate itself from that level? The color palette, the soundtrack are fundamentally different here, and this feels like a true survival horror experience. Oh, I didn't mention, you don't get access to any of your augments whatsoever. So back to basics. You can still use your death mode benefits, and I don't know why I didn't try this before, but this is where I learned you could bunny hop, or kick jump, the very final level. Yeah, and you'll need all these to get through this. From the beginning, you will notice that a lot of the freedom you had in the earlier game is now gone, and it feels a bit linear. So you take this path and know, is this? So this isn't the intended path. So where do we go? There's this button here and... What killed me? I knew there was random spawns before, but this is ludicrous. But you think that's bad? What about this guy sniping you? More random spawns, finicky platforming, floor breaks, and everyone's favorite, invulnerable zombies. And on top of that, where the hell are we meant to go? This is pain. I thought getting chased by Gorbinos and doing the block puzzles was bad, but this just feels like a Kaizo Mario level. But there is hope. So let's consult the Steam guides. Now I know there's a pseudo target to go after, and he'll give you some of your abilities back. That makes this painful experience slightly more bearable. And then there's the exit. So what happened here? I don't know if I have the right answer. I remember reading somewhere that each of the endings was represented by the Trigons actually talking to you, and another mentioned that this was Empty Foxtrot's ascension to becoming a demigod in a sense, like the Trigon. The quote at the end of the game almost summarizes the whole meaning of the game. That a world without death, in a sense, is a world without an ending. So you're never going to get an ending. Now you're free to do whatever you want. You unlock Chaos Mode, which adds more random targets and enemies, and you look for all the secrets, but that's it. The game keeps going. Cruelty Squad to me feels like a game about being a game, but it breaks the fourth wall enough that I can only think of it that way. The fact that the game absolutely encourages you to break it, the game levels feel like they are in fact levels, the secret paintings seemingly breaking all of logic in the end, and all the trolley bits. It seems to me that you the player would be the unseen god of this world, while Empty Foxtrot, the handler, the Trigons are all the deities, all unaware of you the player, but talking to you nonetheless. My headcanon in Cruelty Squad is that just a video game. It's a game that knows it's a game, and encourages you to break it by any means. It's a game that understands what it should be, and that's amazing. Without a doubt, I think Cruelty Squad is 2021's most surprising game. A game that by all popular conventions shouldn't have worked, nor it shouldn't have been successful. It's a game that did not give a fuck about what you thought about it, actively played with you and embraced its oddities. It did whatever it wanted. It's one of those games that all the marketing it needed was word of mouth from a passionate community that gave it a chance despite its rough introduction, and that's beautiful. I want to recommend a few other videos if you're still on the fence about buying it. Firstly, Super Bunny Hop's video is fantastic. When I was writing the script back in June, he covered a lot of what I wanted to cover, except in a much shorter, less rambly fashion, despite me disagreeing with him on the music. Leadhead's 23-minute long video, What Does Cruelty Squad Believe In?, goes into the deep philosophical content and is 100% worth your time. Finally, my favourite video on Cruelty Squad is Cruelty Squad, A Guided Tour by Jimmy McGee. Like Leadhead, he goes into the themes, but he adds a little bit more from a story and gameplay perspective. You can get Cruelty Squad on Steam for €16.79 or your regional equivalent, and you can buy the soundtrack for $3.99. And I'd highly recommend you give it a shot. It goes on sale pretty regularly, and it's worth a gander. Finally, Villy's working on a new video game, and it looks to be a Toho top-down shooter kind of thing, with the Cruelty Squad visual style to it. Future Koka here. Turns out it's not a Toho shmup thing anymore, and it's this. Even though it's very, very early in development, I'm looking forward to seeing what he can create next.